This isn't a particular shock. Mikhail Gorbachev had been sort of out of the rigmarole of politics, sort of hadn't been commenting on things for a number of years due to his long illness. Yet the long shadow of what he decided back in the late 1980s and early 1990s really has shaped much of what Russia became.
Yes, it has. What's really interesting is that Gorbachev is still actually hated in Russia. Even liberal Muscovites really despised him, they hated him, and for a number of different reasons. So we in the West see him as the architect of the end of the Soviet Union and at the end of the Cold War. It's important to remember that before Gorbachev decided to let the Soviet Union go, he did actually initiate a number of attempts to keep the Union together by violence. He sent tanks into Vilnius, in the capital of Lithuania, before it became independent. He sent tanks into Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, in what's called the Black January of 1991, where he tried to put down some uprisings that were also hoping for Azerbaijani independence. But contrary to Putin, Gorbachev realized at some point that the Soviet Union was going to collapse and that keeping it together by force and by violence was not the solution. So he came to the peaceful resolution towards the end when he realized how desperate the bloodshed would be. And he hasn't really said a lot publicly about the war in Ukraine, but he has confided to some of his friends. There's a very famous Russian journalist called Benediktov, to whom Gorbachev confided very shortly after the invasion of Ukraine and said that he thinks it's a mistake and that this could potentially be the end of Putin. Interestingly enough, for a man who's full of contradictions, he supported the Russian annexation of Crimea.
It's really fascinating there, that distinction, the full-scale assault on Ukraine clearly too far for him. It's interesting, though, his own political journey, that he was a committed communist. Of course, he did become the leader of the USSR, but there's some analysis to say that he sort of drifted in his opinions over time, moving from sort of his belief in communism to something more of a socially democratic future for Russia. To what extent do you subscribe to that theory?
I think it's going to take historians a long time to really figure out what Gorbachev really thought. Did he even know himself what he really wanted? When he embarked on reforming the USSR, his goal was to make Bolshevism work. And he initiated some reforms, he initiated economic reforms, which took on a life of their own. And his goal was actually to make the Soviet economy work, to make the USSR and communism work. And when it didn't work, he changed his mind. He was, they say only clever people change their mind and only idiots never change their mind. And so he did change his mind. He did adapt. He was flexible. Gorbachev was the first general secretary of the Soviet Communist Party who actually had a proper formal education. He was one of the first sort of what some Russians like to call normal leaders, i.e. he was not someone who'd come up through, he did come up through poverty, but he managed to get an education. And this informed many of his decisions and his adaptability. But he did not set out to get rid of communism. He set out to make communism work. And when it didn't, then there was an adaptation. But I don't think he really wanted to see capitalism in the way certainly not in the way it ended up developing in Russia, but even the Western-style capitalism was not his goal.
And yet he ended up famously appearing in an advert for Pizza Hut when that American business made its way into new and open Russia.